Good luck on. Okay. Good morning. Uh, good morning. This is Tony Christ from Sunshine and Transparency. It's Sunday morning. It's 8:22 in the morning uh, of August 6th. Uh, I'm not had my coffee, so you're going to have to excuse me. But this is arguably the beginning of a series of the most important podcasts that we've done. They're called Saving America. This is part one. We're going to do four parts. Now, why are we doing such a podcast? Here we're on the verge of a presidential election. Well, I'm going to be very blunt and I'm going to tell you why. Neither presidential candidate, in my opinion, is addressing the problems. And ironically, they're offering gifts. They're offering a number of gifts. And they're both talking about restoring the American dream. Okay. But they're not telling you how they're going to do it. Okay. And they're not addressing the debt specifically. They're not addressing, in general, Kamala Harris has talked about taxing the rich above 400,000. Well, that's a fraction of the population. Is that enough money? No. Okay, but it plays well for her. Trump wants to tariff everybody in the world. Are tariffs good? In general, no. Why is he hanging his hat on tariffs? Well, he's getting a lot of mileage out of it with working Americans. That's why he's a populist president. Is that going to address the debt problem? No, not at all. Is anything Kamala doing going to address the debt problem? Incidentally, under Kamala's reign, indebtedness has now increased for the third consecutive year. In other words, the amount of money we borrow after having a blowout amount on the first year of borrowing, it dropped and has been going up for three consecutive years, the amount we're borrowing. And guess what's been going down for three consecutive years? Tax revenues. The Dems don't talk about that. Now, both these parties are omitting what we are going to be talking about. And I'll be very blunt about it. We have a tax code that is, let me see, 6,000, I believe it's 871 pages. Okay. And that was, according to Public Law 117-154 on 6/23/22. It's 6,871. No one in the IRS even understands. If you call, and I've done this, not recently, I've called to get explanations, and I've gotten different answers by people. They don't even understand the code. Listen, but you know who loves the complexity of the tax code? The lawyers. Oh my goodness, do they have a field day? They'll go all the way to the Supreme Court arguing about specifics in the code. And they make a lot of money doing it. Do you have any idea what we pay in avoidance fees? In avoidance fees, not illegal, right? Do you have any idea what we pay? It's estimated we're paying over 800 billion a year. That's close to $1 trillion to avoid taxes, so they can conjure up schemes to allow Americans to avoid taxes. And the big corporations, oh my God, they'll spend an infinite amount of money to avoid taxes. Ask Apple, ask Burger King, that went to Canada and bought a small chain so they could avoid the corporate tax in America. They have over 10,000 stores. Ask Apple why they don't pay on any phones, pay any American tax on any phones overseas. Because Skadden Arps, they pay Skadden Arps $100 million or a ton of money, let me say it that way, to avoid paying tax. So one thing I want to tell you, and we're going to also talk about entitlements. Now, personally, that strikes a chord with me. Uh, I'm a Greek guy from Falls Church. Okay, don't have my hat. Let me get my hat on. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm a Greek guy from Falls Church. Paul Tsongas was a Greek senator in Massachusetts, a Democrat. And in 1990, I met him in Washington. He was running for president. He was running for the Democratic nomination. Actually, he beat Clinton in two initial primaries, lost to one in the South. And then he had a severe health problem and withdrew. Paul said something I'm not going to forget. He said his biggest worry for America. What do you think his biggest worry was? He said it at a lecture in Washington, D.C. I have a little book he signed too. He said his biggest worry for America going forward, this is 1990, is the feeling of entitlement. Now let's fast forward 34 years and let's ask the question, over the last 34 years, what have the politicians, and I've got to say, they're the worst group of politicians I've ever seen in my life. What have they been selling to Americans if not you're entitled? So we've had a class of politicians, a classless class of politicians for 30 years selling Americans on the idea that they're entitled. Now, that's a far cry from JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. This is the opposite. Americans have been taught by the low-life politicians in the last 30 years in both parties that they are owed, they are entitled. And it got to a point where we have a populist candidate, Mr. Trump, running against a progressive populist candidate, Mrs. Harris, and we have nobody who's fiscally responsible. Nobody. They pretend they are, but they're not. So that's what we are going to do. That's what we are going to be today. We're going to talk about that. So how do they talk about how can they talk about restoring the American dream when in 2024 the revenues received declined for a third year to 4.39 trillion in fiscal 24, which ended September 30th. Okay. Revenues received by the government were 4.39 trillion. Now, historically, oh my God, the fours, only Biden has been a president where revenues have been so big over the fours, not the Trump years. The Trump years, they were down in the threes, and no one prior. So he's collected more revenue than anyone. But what were the spending? What were they spending? The debt, I checked it at 11 months, it was 1.89 trillion. 11 months. I didn't see a figure for the last month, which would have been September. And I saw estimates that were anywhere from 1.9 to a little over 2. But if we take that 11-month figure, okay, and we subtract it from the 4.39 money that they collected, and then we take the estimate for the entitlements. Now, the entitlements, people go, well, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. That's not all. There's SNAPS programs, food stamps. There's all the immigration programs that were unleashed, the expenses. There's literally, according to astute observers, 100 welfare programs. Now they're small, and some of them are incorporated in Medicaid, and they're literally all over the place, and Medicare. which has been commingled with Obamacare. Uh, but the point is, they have to be counted under the entitlement umbrella because an entitlement is something, and really that's a very Orwellian world. Have you ever heard a word like entitlement? I'm entitled. Oh, that's about the last thing. They're gifts. They're gifts. Now, again, with Medicare and Social Security, hardworking Americans pay for them all their lives, and I'm not trying to minimize them, but the rest of them are all gifts. So, what is the amount of the gifts? How much did it cost out of the 4.39 trillion of taxes that were collected in fiscal 2024? You ready for this? A little over 80%. The entitlements were a little over 80%. The mixture of things that you are entitled to because you pay for them and other programs. So when you add in the cost of the interest on the cost of the interest of the debt, which is almost 900 billion, guess what? You come to 101.7% of the monies collected. Well, what about all the discretionary agencies? What about the military? They get nothing. Actually, 101.7% is more than the tax money collected, and the tax money of 4.39 trillion is a record level. There have never been taxes collected that high as the taxes collected during the Biden years. In a snapshot, the first Biden year 21 was 4 trillion. Second Biden year 22 was 4.95 trillion. That was an all-time record. Third Biden year was 4.4 trillion. That was 2023 fiscal year. Fiscal year 2024, 4.39 trillion. That's 50 billion less. 50 billion drop off. Billion. What's a billion here, a billion there? Oh my God, we're in the trillions. What does it matter? So basically, the cost of the entitlements in fiscal year 2024 just concluded, plus the cost of interest on the debt, costs more than all the money collected, which was 4.39 trillion. There's something wrong. And that's why we're doing this show. And it's not anything you're being told by anyone in politics. None of our politics, they don't want you to know because they're too busy giving out gifts and promises that are they going to be able to keep them? I don't think so. I don't see how. The country is really stretched out with what they owe, with debts from past political gifts. So here we are at a time of high revenue, highest tax revenues in our history. And we're having to borrow money to pay for the 14 agencies, starting with defense and 13 other agencies that run our government. And we don't have it. We've spent all the money that we collected, plus 1.7% we haven't even collected, on two things, just two things: entitlements, the whole umbrella of entitlements, and interest on what we owe, just the interest payment. We're not paying back any of the principal, but neither political candidate wants to talk about it. Mr. Trump, the populist, added 7.8 trillion to the debt. Mr. Biden-Harris, the combo, added almost 7.4 trillion to the debt. And it's been increasing the amount they borrowed. It hit a low in 22 of 1.3 trillion. It went to 1.7 trillion in 23. And in 24, as I said, I don't have the last month, but it's right around 2 trillion. So it's going straight up. And the amount of money collected the last 3 years is going down. Duh, that doesn't look like a good picture. So we're going to spend the next 4 weeks talking about structural changes in America that were going to give us a fighting chance to protect the value of our currency going forward. Our currency is under attack, and you know who the attackers are. But let me tell you who the biggest attacker is, because you don't know. It's not China. It's not Russia. It's not Iran. It's not North Korea. It's ourselves, us. We are the biggest attacker of our own dollar. We're destroying it at a rate that is horrific. And I'm going to state right now on this program that our dollar will not survive another 4 years. I'm sorry for taking issue with CBO. CBO says we have 10 years to deal with the Social Security problem. I hate to take issue, but CBO is always wrong on any prediction that's more than 2 years. They have a 100% record of being wrong in their own literature. The Congressional Budget Office says we're right 10% of the time in their own literature. And who do they work for? They work for the Congress, as do the other agencies that are predicting. And so basically, we have a short period of time to fix this. So it's important. It would be ideal to get some accountability out of the two candidates, Harris and Trump, as to what they plan to do. But people don't want to hear things that might be painful. Oh, we love being an American, but incidentally, give me the money you owe me, right? And I'm a citizen. I am entitled. No, you're not. No, you're not. If you want to protect the basic foundational things that have created our country. And I've got another thing that Brian Rydell from Manhattan Institute, and this is a quote from just a few days ago, actually in June of 2024. Both candidates are taking the Santa Claus approach. I mean, you have a population that is so used to gifts, that have been taught by terrible politicians for 30 years that they're entitled, which is what Paul Tsongas warned of in 1990, and they want gifts. So let's go on, because we've got some proposals. We're taking the tax code and shredding it, throwing it in the trash. 8,971 pages in the trash. Go. And we're starting with a blank sheet of paper. And let's talk about, and some of these points are going to be a little bit difficult to get to, because we're going to talk about ad valorem taxes. Okay. Most of Europe, every sophisticated country has an ad valorem tax, but I will not propose an ad valorem tax that is not visible on your receipt. Europe, oh my God, they don't write them on the receipt, so people don't know what part's the tax and what part's the inflation. And okay, so we have to consider seriously ad valorem taxes. They're easier to collect. They're much harder to evade, because you have to buy something. Say you go out and you want to buy something, a car, whatever, and there's an ad valorem tax on it. It's very hard. You can't evade it. It deals with consumption, when we spend the money, not with income. So we're going to talk about ad valorem taxes, and we're going to talk about a particular kind of ad valorem tax, because I put it in our proposal. It's called a harmonized ad valorem tax. Now, ad valorem means that every stage the tax is imposed. And that really protects against evasion, because the guy that paid the wholesaler for the product before it was final had to pay that tax, okay? And he gets his money back when the guy that buys it from him pays the tax, as long as he paid it. So there's a record at every stage in an ad valorem tax that the tax was paid. And let's say it was 10%. The first guy pays 10% on a dollar, the second guy pays 10% on $1.50, and so forth and so on till you or me, us, the consumers, buy it in a final transaction and we see a 10% tax, ad valorem tax, and we're using a harmonized sales tax is nothing but an ad valorem tax that we share some of the money with the state. And we're going to do that because 45 states already collect sales taxes and they have an infrastructure. And we want to use that infrastructure so we don't have to undergo a lot more expense. So we are going to impose some ad valorem taxes. And I can tell you right now, one thing that's at the top of my list, no, it's not tobacco. No, it's not alcohol. You ready? Sugar. We're going to tax sugar. We're going to tax products that have above a certain level of sugar in them. Why? Well, it's killing America. We have 44% obesity in America today. You're darn right we're going to tax it. If you want to get fat, you're going to pay. Okay? As you destroy your health and become a burden to our system because you're protected, another gift. You're totally protected. You're not responsible for your obesity. God knows who. So you're going to pay for it. So we're going to tax sugar. We're also going to tax certain complex foods that are very unhealthy. And we're also going to propose an increase in the federal gas tax. But let me tell you this, we're going to get rid of all gifts, all monies that are given away for buying EVs, putting solar in, all that's going to disappear. But we're going to add a little bit of tax to the gas, the federal gas tax. It's stayed the same since 1993, and we're going to add a little bit of money to that. But all the gifts, the guy that spends $100,000 on an EV gets a $10,000 gift. No, we're not doing those. None of them. Okay, so that's an area of a new area that's going to take us near to almost every industrialized country. And we're not going to do as much of it as they do, but we certainly are going to do some of it. We have to. We're in a terrible, terrible debt hole. Our leadership has done nothing. They've talked the talk, but they haven't put the shovels down. As they're talking the talk, they keep digging the hole. Ask Miss Harris. Just since she's announced, she's dug it 300 billion deeper. Ask Mr. Trump. Ask Joe Biden. They keep digging the hole. What's the first thing you have to do when you're in debt and you're in a hole? Put the shovel down. Stop digging. They don't get it. So we have to do something to save the country. So we're going to discuss an ad valorem tax. Now, the other thing, there are two golden principles that we're going to go by in constructing a brand new tax code for America. And the one principle is a military saying, and it's very well known in the military. It's called KISS. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. KISS. That's our first golden rule in forming a new tax code. And now the second rule is, aside from KISS, is BBLR. Broaden the base and lower the rate. This is a dirty little secret that both liberal and conservative economists have known about forever. If you want to get more money. But the political class, mostly lawyers, are milking the idea of the rich guy has to pay more. Who cares about the upper 1/10 of 1% pay more? You got to get more revenue for the country. That's the object. You want to get more revenue for the country. So we're going to get rid of all deductions. All deductions are gone with a couple of minor carve-outs. One of them is for children. We're going to increase the deduction on a child in a family. Oh, incidentally, if you're married, the two-person deduction will be $25,000 in my proposal. And if you're married and don't have children, it will be $22,000. If you're married and have one child, it will be $25,000 for the mom and dad and $10,000 for the child. The second child will be another $10,000, and the third child will be another $10,000. And after three, it's going to drop to $2,000. So if you have three kids and you're married, Pete Buttigieg, Pothole Pete, we're going to honor the fact that you call yourself married. As long as you have a stable two-person environment for children, that's okay. But you have to go through the legal act of tying the knot. You're eligible for those increased deductions. A mom and dad with three kids will have $55,000 of deductions from the government. We need to encourage families. We've been destroying them since the mid-60s with welfare. I mean, what do I need to keep a man around? All I need to do is create babies and I'll get paid. The government will pay me. Oh my God, what a deal. I'll just throw him out in the morning. I'm good. So basically, we need to reward people to do what America's done for generations, which is have a strong family, a mom and a dad and kids. And we need to give them some incentive to get them back to that rational context, so we can raise the next generation, so we can invest our capital in the young. So that's going to be in the proposal that we're putting forward for sunshine and transparency for this program. So basically, we've talked about ad valorem. We've talked about tax deductions. Now we're going to talk about the rate of taxation. Keep in mind BBLR, broaden the base and lower the rate. Broaden the base and lower the rate. Why? To get more money. We don't care if some guy's paying some billionaires paying an 80% tax rate. We want the government to get more money because we're broke. I hate to say it that way. You're not hearing it from Harris or Trump, but we are broke. And frankly, those two characters have nothing in their records that say they can fix it. And that's why we're trying to offer a solution, a structural solution. This isn't about policy this and policy that. This is changing the structure so we can survive the nation. Get it? I hope you do. So basically, we're gonna move on, and we're gonna talk about, for a moment, welfare. Then we're going to come back and finish with not a final, but some very preliminary bullets of a new tax code that's going to max out at 21%, the corporate tax rate. But there won't be any deductions. And if you have a foundational charity and you think you can earn money, it's going to be taxed. Any dollar that's taken in a charity that's not given that year will be subject to our tax code, billionaires. So go think up something else. And Apple Computer, guess what? You're going to pay a tax on foreign sales. You can't call yourself a great American company when you pay lawyers all that money to evade every phone you sell outside of America, to evade the tax rate. But it won't be 21%. It's going to be less, because we understand the world is a place where you can pay a lot less taxes. And we want to not make it that painful. We don't want you to evade or avoid that responsibility. But that's later. So basically the top tax rate for our billionaires is going to be 21%, but there'll be no deductions. Everybody's worried about home prices being expensive. Miss Harris, Mr. Trump, but they have no solution. Well, I'm going to give you the solution. We're going to take away the interest deductibility with the other deductions. Now, if the government is too prissy and too sensitive about that particular stipulation to getting rid of deductions, they could drop it to $250,000 for a year or two. It needs to go to zero. We'll pick up $100 billion from that move in taxes, and home prices will go down as much as 8%. There you go. You got lower home prices. What both candidates are talking about, but neither has a way to do it. So the sticky part is the so-called entitlements, particularly Medicaid, SNAPs, the program that gives many people food, starting one individual with an income of 20-some $100 a month can get it. A family with 6 children with incomes less than $8,500 a month can get it. But there's a lot of fraud in it. There are two agencies. One's a government agency that estimates there's 14% fraud in SNAPs. And SNAPs are $112 billion expense a year. And the government's estimating 14% fraud. An outside agency, which I tend to believe, is estimating over 20%. So basically, you could conclude from that somewhere between $14 billion and $22 billion the government's defrauded. Then we get to Medicaid. Now, CBO estimates that Medicaid is over an $800 billion, almost $1 trillion expense. The states are involved for $78 billion, okay? But there's sort of a whack-a-mole game going on between the states and the government, because the states know that if they put up a dollar, the government's going to put up 5 or 10. So it's almost a way that the states milk the government for more money. So there's no incentive for oversight in Medicaid. The government itself, CBO, estimates that Medicaid in the last 12 months had $100 billion in fraudulent transfers. So you add SNAPs, the food program, to Medicaid, by the government's own estimate, you're talking $114 billion. Outside estimates on SNAPs raise it up quite a bit more. So what do you do about that? Do you just tolerate it and keep sending the checks out? No, you're not that stupid. Government was not structured to run welfare programs. It's not meant to. It's a bureaucracy. It's not meant to do that. It's supposedly focused on, essentially, the Constitution says 5 things. Do 5 things and do them well. But God knows we're doing 2,000 things today, and we're doing a bad job. So what are we going to do? We have to do something about SNAPs and Medicare. We have to have some accountability in those programs. So Social Security is easier. We're going to levy a 5% tax on everybody that is above 175,000 in income, and to pay for Social Security. And income, incidentally, we're not penalizing earned income anymore. All income is going to be treated the same, earned and unearned. If you're a rich guy, you're going to pay up to 21% tax, and you're going to pay the 5% for Social Security, 26%. You will pay it. There are no deductions. Not a way to get your average tax payment down to 16 or 15%, which is what it is right now for the upper 1/10 of 1%. No way. Not going to happen. Nothing to deduct. You just have to go to jail. No complexity. Tell your lawyer friends. And you ought to tell the law profession to get used to driving a more modest car instead of Rolls Royces and BMWs, because what we are trying to do with this code, this simplicity, is making it simple to enforce, not requiring as much in the government, and so simple, the lawyers, we want to deprive them of the majority of that 800 billion avoidance fee. What are we giving it to them for? So they can drive Rolls Royces and act like big cheese? No, we don't need it. It will find an economic use, a more needed economic use. So basically, we're going to talk a lot more about entitlements in the next 3 weeks. I've just given you a very basic run through. Oh, also, we should bump the age 1 year to 68 to start Social Security. So we bump the age and we stick another 5% on immediately, and we observe it the next 3 or 4 years and see where we are. Forget CBO's prediction of 10 years. That is just absolute horseshit. Believe me, it really is. Anybody that buys into government predictions is really stupid. I don't know, and I hear so many economists doing it, it's disgusting. If they're more than 2 years out, they're all wrong. So now let's get to the tax code. We've given deductions for children. And let's get to some bullet points on the tax code. We're running a lot of time here. We're going to be doing this for 4 weeks. So get used to it. Okay. And then we'll finish it off. So the standard deduction is going to be lowered. For one individual, it's going to be $11,000. As I said, for a married couple, lawfully with a certificate, married. You hear me, Pete Buttigieg? It's $22,000. The same couple can deduct $25,000 if they have one child. Each child up to 3 will be a $10,000 deduction. If you have 3 children, you can deduct $55,000 of your income. Guess what? If you make 60, that only leaves 5,000 that will be taxed at a 10% rate. $500 if you make 60,000. Yep. $500. Again, all income will be treated the same. Do you hear that, hedge fund guys? All income will be treated the same. Capital gains will be treated as regular income. So you don't take capital gains on actual income when you're working with your client to make them more money. Even if the percent it's a percentage of the increase. And if you do, that's fine too, because it's going to be the same tax. So at the 60,000 level, you're going to be paying 10%. From 60,000 to 399,000 a year, it's going to go from 11% to 18%. And it's going to be a proration. So each thousand is going to be a fractional amount more in taxes. When you get to 399,000, you're paying 18%. Of course, minus your deductions in taxes. Now, above, as I said, 175,000 is the point at which an individual payroll person does not have to pay the 6.2% Social Security fee. Above that, we are tacking on 5%. That 5% is going to go up to a billionaire. That didn't exist before. They are going to pay into to give us some history in the next 3 or 4 years of where we are with Social Security. Above 400,000, income will start at 18%. Up to $1 million, it will go to 20%. Now remember, you're saying, well, the guy making $1 million should be paying more than the guy making 400. No, we want him to pay it because he has no deductions. We want to get that 20% from him. And And remember, there's an additional 5% that's going to Social Security. Above a million, up to 10 million, 50 million, 500 million, they will pay 21% plus 5% to Social Security. All tax credits will be eliminated. They don't benefit the lower 60% anyway. Their government throwing away money, dear, precious money, to try to force us to buy EVs, solar, whatever. When it's economic, we'll buy it, buddy. We're not opposed to it. Make it so it can compete, and it will be there, and it will become competitive. And remember, we're sticking a little bit more on gas tax. Now, the ad valorem taxes. We're going to charge 20% on top of the price for products that use sugar. 20%. We're going to pay the states 2% for collecting it. And the death tax I'm going to mention, and then we're about done with this first week. Remember, we're going on for 4 weeks with this. So the death tax, if you have an estate, and we will add into this whole code inflation. So the tax rates, you won't get up to another rate. We may not do it annually, we may do it every 3 or 4 years, but we're gonna raise it due to inflation, particularly with these morons we have running our country right now that have put us into an inflation context. So with the death tax, I think an estate for an individual of 4 million should pay 1%, and then gets up to 5 million on a proration basis, it's 5%. Then increasing to 10% when it gets up to 100 million. Okay, and that's a proration. So each million, 6, 7, 8 will have a fractional increase over 5%. And it gets up to 500 million of revenue, it's 20%. For 500 million of revenue earned in 1 year, passive, earned, however it is, it's 20%. Unescapable. So that will do the death tax. Now, I'm toying with using a harmonized ad valorem tax on all goods and services. That's right, Mr. Lawyer. You have to put a 10% government tax on your fee. Have fun. And accountants, as a matter of fact, and all services and products. And we would give 2% to the state, and it would be a harmonized ad valorem, and we do the other 8. Now, it's simple. There's no deductions. It's going to be so simple. We're not going to need as many people to enforce it. My God, the lawyers, get ready for a depression, Mr. Lawyer. You're not going to be able to, there's nothing to charge. We didn't write it on 6,971 pages. We're on 5 pages of paper. When we get through in 4 weeks, we may have 25 pages, but it's not going to be 6,971. Ha ha. So I hope you all have a blessed week. This is our first week that we're reaching out and we're exploring. We've got a lot of work to do the next 3 weeks. Please stay with us while we're exploring how we can really get back to the American dream, how we can reinstitute hope and opportunity, which has been smothered. And guess what? Neither of our presidential candidates have a clue. Or if they do, they're not sharing it. They're too occupied with gifts. They're competing for gifts. Americans are mature. Americans understand we've got a hard job ahead of us. We have to work together to get it done. So thank you and have a blessed week. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. This is the first podcast I've done without a cup of coffee, and I'm going to get off it, and I'm going to go out to Starbucks, and I'm going to buy a large cup of coffee. Bye bye. See you next week.